I grew up in a small town in rural Washington state, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and nothing particularly interesting ever happens, and most people are completely fine with that. I lived there until I was 22, and in all those years, the scariest thing that had ever happened to me was locking my keys in my car outside the grocery store. That changed the October I was 19. I was living at home at the time, still finishing up community college, and my parents had gone away for the weekend to visit my aunt about 3 hours south. My younger brother was supposed to stay home with me, but he had ended up going with them at the last minute, which meant I had the house entirely to myself from Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. I was not bothered by that. I had stayed home alone before plenty of times. The house was at the end of a quiet street. We had a dog named Porter, a big scruffy mutt who took his job as a watchdog very seriously, and I had no reason to feel anything other than fine. Friday night was completely normal. I ordered food, watched movies, fell asleep on the couch with Porter draped across my legs the way he always did. Saturday was the same. I went to a friend's place in the afternoon and came home around 9 p.m. to find it raining. Not a light drizzle, a proper October rainstorm. The kind that comes in off the coast and settles in 4 days. Heavy and constant, and loud enough against the roof that I had to turn the TV up louder than usual to hear it. Let Porter out into the backyard around 10 p.m. and stood at the back door waiting for him. He did his usual circuit of the yard and came back in and shook rainwater across the kitchen floor, and I dried him off with the towel we kept by the door for exactly that reason. Everything completely normal. I went to bed around midnight. Porter jumped up and settled at the foot of the bed the way he always did, and I lay there listening to the rain and fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up and it was still dark. I checked my phone, las 2:47 de la mañana. I lay there for a second trying to figure out what had woken me up. The rain was still going. Maybe even heavier than before. Porter was no longer at the foot of the bed. I sat up and looked around the room. He was standing at the bedroom door, which I had left slightly open. Just standing there in the dark, looking out into the hallway. Not making a sound. Just standing completely still with every muscle in his body rigid. I had never seen him do that before. In 4 years of having that dog, I had never once seen him stand like that. I got up quietly and went to the door and looked out into the hallway. It was dark and empty. I whispered Porter's name, and he did not look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on something at the end of the hallway, and his body stayed completely rigid. I stood there for probably a full minute just watching him and listening. The rain was loud enough that I was not sure I would have been able to hear anything inside the house, even if there was something to hear. That thought was not a comforting one. Then Porter moved. He took 3 slow, deliberate steps forward into the hallway and stopped again. Still, silent, still, rigid, just staring toward the end of the hall where the stairs were. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. I know that sounds like an overreaction, but something about the way that dog was behaving had bypassed every rational thought in my head and gone straight to the part of my brain that just wanted another person to know what was happening. My dad answered on the 3rd ring, groggy, and I told him quietly that Porter was acting strange and something felt wrong. He asked me if I had checked the doors, and I told him I had locked everything before bed. He told me to check again and stay on the phone with him while I did. I walked through the house with my phone to my ear and Porter walking just ahead of me the whole time. Still tense, still silent, still leading me like he knew exactly where he was going. Front door, locked. Back door, locked. Every window on the ground floor, closed and latched. We got to the living room and Porter stopped. The living room had a large window that looked out onto the front yard and the street. Because of the rain and the darkness outside, and the fact that I had a lamp on inside the room. The window was partially reflective. I could see the room reflected back at me in the glass as well as the dark, blurry shape of the front yard and street, beyond it through the rain. I stood there looking at the window, and my dad was saying something in my ear that I was not processing anymore because I had seen something in the glass dot, in the reflection of the room behind me. Visible in the window, there was a shape near the hallway entrance that had not been there a second ago. Not Porter. Too tall, too still, the wrong shape entirely. I spun around. The hallway was empty. Porter was standing at my feet looking up at me. I told my dad what I had seen, and he told me to go to my neighbor's house immediately, and not to stop for anything. I grabbed Porter by the collar and we went out the front door into the rain, and across to the neighbor's house, and I knocked until their light came on. My neighbor came with me back to the house. We went through every room, Every closet, under both beds, the basement, the garage, nothing. Every entry point was still locked from the inside. There was no sign that anyone had been in the house. The police came at my dad's insistence. Same. Result? Nothing found, nothing disturbed, no explanation. My dad drove up from my aunt's house that same night and arrived around 5 a.m. I sat at the neighbor's house with Porter until he got there. I have two things I cannot explain about that night. The first is what Porter was responding to. In 11 years of life, that dog never once behaved that way before or after that night. Whatever he sensed was real enough to make him lead me through that house, like he was tracking it. Room by room. The second is what I saw in the window. I know what I saw. I know the difference between a trick of light and a reflection and a shape that should not have been there. I saw something standing in that hallway behind me, and when I turned around, it was gone. Do not have an explanation for either of those things. I have thought about it for years and I still do not. My dad put the house on the market 6 months later for unrelated reasons, and we moved across town. I have never once driven down that street since. Story 2, I need to give some context before I get into this because without it, the story does not make complete sense. I am a social worker. Have been for about 12 years. I work with families in crisis situations, and part of that job occasionally involves home visits at hours that most office workers would find unreasonable, late evenings, early mornings, sometimes both in the same day. I mention this because it is relevant to why I was where I was at the time this happened, and also because it is relevant to how I read situations. 12 years of social work teaches you to pay attention to details that other people miss. It teaches you to trust your instincts about environments and people. And it taught me that what I experienced that night was not something I was misreading. It was a Tuesday evening in late November. I had a home visit scheduled for 7 p.m. on the other side of the city, about a 40-minute drive in normal conditions. It had been raining since mid-afternoon, and by the time I left my office around 6:15, it had gotten significantly worse. The kind of rain that makes highway driving genuinely unpleasant and reduces visibility to the point where you are relying on the taillights of the car ahead of you more than you would. I was about 20 minutes into the drive when my GPS rerouted me due to what it said was an accident on the highway. The new route took me off the main road and through a stretch of older residential streets I did not know well. Narrower roads, older houses set back behind big trees. The kind of neighborhood that feels like it belongs to a different era. My car started making a sound about 5 minutes into the detour. A low rhythmic thumping that I recognized immediately as a flat tire. I pulled over on a quiet residential street under a large tree that provided almost no shelter from the rain and sat there for a second collecting myself. I called roadside assistance and was told the wait time was approximately 90 minutes due to high demand from weather-related incidents. I called the family I was visiting and rescheduled. Then I sat in my car in the rain on this empty street and decided the best thing to do was wait. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping through the rain. The street was otherwise empty. I scrolled through my phone and listened to the rain and felt sorry for myself about the 90-minute wait. Then I noticed a man standing on the pavement about 30 feet ahead of my car. He was just standing there in the rain. No umbrella, no hood up, no apparent destination. Just standing on the pavement in the pouring rain looking in the direction of my car. I could not make out his face clearly through the rain-streaked windshield and the darkness, but I could see that he was not moving and that he was facing toward me. I told myself he was waiting for someone, or he had just stepped out of one of the houses, or any number of reasonable explanations. I kept my eyes on my phone, but I kept glancing up at him every 30 seconds or so. He was still there after 5 minutes. Still not moving, still facing my direction. After 10 minutes, I turned my engine on and locked my doors, which I realized I had not done when I pulled over. Basic error that I do not usually make. I turned on my hazard lights, partly so that roadside assistance could find me, and partly, if I am being honest, because I wanted the additional visibility. I wanted it to be clear that I was in that car and I was aware of my surroundings. The man took a step toward my car, just one step. Then he stopped again. I called my husband and told him where I was and what I was seeing. He stayed on the phone with me. The man did not move again for several minutes, and I had almost convinced myself it was over when he started walking. Not quickly, not running, just a slow, deliberate walk directly toward my car. I put the car in drive. I know I had a flat tire. I know that driving on a flat causes damage, and I know it is not what you are supposed to do. I did not care. I drove 2 blocks on that flat tire until I reached a busier road with more traffic and more light. And I pulled into the forecourt of a petrol station and sat there with my husband, still on the phone, until my heart rate came back to something resembling normal. Roadside assistance found me at the petrol station 40 minutes later. The tire was ruined beyond repair from driving on it, but the man on that street never reached my car. Reported it to the police non-emergency line that night. They took my description and told me they would increase patrols in the area. I do not know if they found anyone. I never heard back. What I think about when I think about that night is the single deliberate step toward my car after I locked my doors and turned on my hazard lights. Not the behavior of someone standing in the rain waiting for a bus or collecting their thoughts. A response. A reaction to something I had done. Like he had been watching closely enough to notice the exact moment I locked those doors and decided that was the moment to move. 12 years of reading situations and people, and that single step told me everything I needed to know. Story 3. This is the story I have told the fewest people. Not because I am embarrassed by it, or because I think people will not believe me. I know what happened. I do not need anyone to validate it. I have just found that telling it out loud makes it feel recent again in a way that I have spent a long time trying to get past. I was 24 and living alone for the first time in an older house that I was renting in a small city in Vermont. Ground floor, 2 bedrooms, a small front porch, a backyard that backed onto a narrow alley. I had been there about 4 months, long enough to feel settled, not long enough to know every sound the house made. It was a Friday night in early March, and it had been raining since the previous evening. Not a storm exactly, just that relentless gray March rain that feels like it has always been happening and will never stop. I had been inside all day, no particular reason to go out, nowhere to be. Perfectly content to spend the day reading and doing nothing around las 8 de la noche. I ordered food for delivery and sat by the front window waiting for it, watching the rain come down under the streetlight outside. There was nobody on the street. There rarely was on a Friday evening in that neighborhood. Most of my neighbors were older and kept to themselves. The delivery came. I ate. I watched something on my laptop. I went to bed around 11. The rain was still going. I fell asleep listening to it. I woke up at 1:19 a.m. I know the time because I looked at my phone immediately, and I have never forgotten it. I woke up the way you sometimes do when a sound stops, rather than when one starts. The sudden absence of something rather than the arrival of it. The rain had stopped. Later in the complete silence, and that is when I heard it. Footsteps on my front porch, slow and unhurried, crossing from one end of the porch to the other and then stopping just outside my front door. Then a knock, 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, with a pause between each one. I did not move. I lay completely still in my bed and stared at the ceiling and waited. Silence. Then 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same pace. I grabbed my phone and opened my camera app to the front doorbell camera I had installed when I moved in. The porch was empty. Nobody standing at the door. Nobody visible on the steps or the path leading to the street. But I had heard the knocking. I had heard the footsteps. I was certain of both. I lay there for another few minutes. Nothing. Silence so complete that I could hear my own breathing. I had almost convinced myself it had been a dream when I heard footsteps again. This time, not on the front porch, on the side of the house, moving from the front toward the back. I switched the camera view to the backyard camera. There was a man standing in my backyard. He was standing completely still near the back fence, partially obscured by the shadow of the large tree in the corner of the yard. I could see enough of him to tell that he was facing the house, facing my back door. I called 911. I whispered my address and told him there was someone in my backyard and I was alone. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and stay away from the doors and windows. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with my back against the bed and my phone to my ear, and I waited. The police arrived in 11 minutes. I watched on the camera as the lights from their torches swept across the backyard. I watched them find him still standing near the back fence. I watched what looked like a brief exchange, and then one officer walking him toward the side gate, while the other came to my front door. They had found him. It was real. He was there. The officer at my door told me they had a man in custody and asked me if I knew him. I said no. He described him to me, and I said no again. He told me the man was not making much sense and appeared to be under the influence of something and that they were taking him. In that, He asked me if I wanted to press charges for trespassing, and I said yes, without hesitating. What happened in court 3 weeks later was the part that stayed with me longest. The man's public defender argued that his client had no memory of that night, and no prior connection to my address, and no explanation for how he had ended up in my backyard. The judge accepted a plea and he received a fine and a warning, and that was the end of it legally. After the hearing, I asked the officer who had been first on scene that night one question. I asked him how long he thought the man had been in my backyard before he called. He thought about it for a second, and then he said, based on the condition of the ground near the fence, the flattened wet grass, and the depth of the footprints, he thought the man had been standing there for a while. He said probably since before the rain stopped. The rain had stopped at 1:07 de la mañana. That was when I woke up. I woke up because the rain stopped, and the silence hit me, and in that silence, I heard the footsteps on my porch, which means he had already been in that backyard while it was raining. Standing in the dark in the pouring rain in my backyard in the middle of the night, completely still, for however long before the rain stopped, and he decided to walk around to the front door and knock it. Moved out 2 months later. I now live on the 3rd floor of a building with a secure entry and a camera on every corridor. I have not lived on a ground floor since, and I do not plan to. The rain does not bother me the way it used to. What bothers me now is when it stops. Rain at night is supposed to feel like shelter, like the world outside is doing its thing and you are safely removed from it behind glass and walls and a locked door. These 3 stories are a reminder that the rain does not actually change what is out there. It just makes it harder to see and harder to hear. And sometimes that is exactly what something out there is counting on. Check your logs tonight. And if the rain stops suddenly in the middle of the night and everything goes quiet, pay attention to that silence. These 3 people wish they had